From 1965, the Easy Beats with Friday on My Mind. That record was produced by our guest today. He's one of the most important and influential record producers of the rock era. His work with not only the Easy Beats, but the Kinks, the Who, the Creation, and on it goes, remains just as fresh and vital today as it ever has. Shel Talmy, welcome to the show.
Thank you, and thank you for that. Nice to be vital.
Well, it's so true. Those records are just never going to grow old. So how does this young kid from Chicago wind up producing records in London before the Beatles even hit? I mean, before Beatlemania. You were poised to be at the very beginning of the British invasion.
I suppose the proper thing to say is just lucky, I guess. But, I was moved from Chicago when I was about 15 to L.A., and I went to work as a recording engineer here in L.A. for a guy named Phil Yend, who had the original Conway Studios, which have since become a different location and still as important as ever. The owner of Conway, who was Phil Yen, was also English. They kept extolling the virtues of how wonderful London was and all that kind of stuff. And after a year and a half, I said, okay, fine, you convinced me. I'm going to take 5 weeks off. I'm going to see London. I'm going to see Paris before life passes me by, because it was early 20s and like that. So I did take precaution of before I went, because I didn't have a whole lot of bread. My friend Nick Benet, who was at Capitol Records A&R, I told him I was going, and that I was going to say that I produced stuff, because I pretty much had not, just being an engineer. And he said, "Here, take a couple of my acetates and tell him you did them." I said, "Oh, cool, okay." So I got to London, and through somebody else I knew, they arranged an appointment with me, for me, with Dick Rowe at Decca Records. And I thought my best way of doing this is, I'm American, they expect me to be brash. So I went in and I said, "Here's what I just did," and I gave him the 2 acetates that Nick gave me, which happened to be Lou Rawls and the Beach Boys. And he heard me, he said, "You start today." So by the time that the time went by, I had a hit, and which was The Bachelors. I think in retrospect they probably tested me, because they were 3 harmonica players, and I stayed for the next 17 years.
From 1962, The Bachelors with Charmaine, produced by our guest today, Shel Talmy, before Decca Records found out that he hadn't actually produced Lou Rawls and the Beach Boys. And I love the fact that this incredible career begins on a bluff.
Well, it was a lot easier. We're talking about 1962. Nobody would have dreamt of picking up a telephone in London and calling somebody in L.A. and saying, "You know who this bozo is," or pretending to be a producer. They would have written, which in fact I wrote letters, some of which went to my pals, who wrote back and said I was brilliant and all that kind of crap. So that's why it worked out. I mean, I'm not sure it could happen today, but in fact, when I went in to see Dick, I said, "By the way, I'm an independent producer, and I get royalties." And fortunately for me, he was very pro-American. So he said, "Okay, that's cool." So I think I was probably the first ever producer in England that actually collected royalties.
Wow. And you know what? It wasn't that much long after that you discovered this unknown band called the Ravens, who later became the Kinks.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, and I was in Denmark Street, which, as most people know, I think, was the publisher's street in London. And I was visiting some friends of mine for lunch, and Robert Wace, who was one of the Kinks managers, came in with an acetate under his arm, and he said, "Anybody here would like to listen to it?" I said, "I'm here, I'll listen to it." I liked a lot of what I heard, and we kind of went on from there. I said, "I think I can get him a deal," and I took him into Pi, and the rest, as I guess they say, is history.
Yeah, it sure is. And, You Really Got Me would be their third single. So were you working toward a
Well,
sound with the Kinks?
no, no. The first two singles were things I was commanded to do by Pi, which included Long Tall Sally, which I did not want to do, and three other songs that they picked that I did not want to do, but they did. And so after those two came out and nothing really happened, the Kinks and I kind of rebelled, I think is maybe the proper word. That this is garbage. We want to do what we want to do. And the next single was Then You Really Got Me.
I absolutely love the guitar sound you capture. It's just crystal clear. It's powerful. Monolithic is really the best word for it. Same with the drums, too. And, of course, Dave Davies, what an underrated guitar player.
Well, I've been saying that for years. He has been very underrated. And no, my guitar sound came from me being a recording engineer. I had a lot of time to experiment, so I spent a lot of time figuring out how to do the best miking for guitar and getting the best sounds out of them. And the same thing, of course, which most people know, is I worked out how to use a dozen mics on drums at the time, of which everybody was using 3 or 4 mics, and that was it, because I wanted total control of all the drums. They said, oh, you can't do that as a little phase. A month later, everybody was trying to use 12 mics. So.
Right. And could you sense from the very beginning how special a songwriter Ray Davies was?
Oh, well, that was one of the things that brought me closer to wanting to do something with him. He was an exceptional songwriter, and he was also, which was, I think, totally new at the time, a commenter on the social situation in England, which nobody was doing. And Ray was incredibly prolific. He could go home and come back the next day with a dozen songs, and we sit down and go through them and say, okay, this needs a little more work. Let's save this one maybe for an LP, and okay, let's do this one. And that's kind of how it went.
We just heard The Who with I Can't Explain, 1965, a record, like everything else we're playing this hour, produced by our guest today, Shel Talmy. And both Pete Townsend and Roger Daltrey have said that I Can't Explain was heavily influenced by the Kinks. So you were working with the Kinks and The Who at the same time. Did the Kinks ever say to you, hey, we just heard this song by The Who. It kind of sounds like what we do. What's going on here?
Not really. I think the reason being that we're now talking again early 60s, where the music scene in London in particular, which is where it was all happening, was pretty small. There were really like 2 clubs. There was the Revolution and the Speakeasy, which were the 2 band clubs. And everybody knew everybody else, and for the most part, everybody got on with everybody else. And in many occasions at either one of these 2 clubs, one of the bands would get up and play something they were working on and wanting input from the rest of the guys there. So it wasn't a case of rivalry. It was more cooperation than that, which is, I know, sounds strange, but it's true.
And much like the Kinks, you hear this demo from a group called The High Numbers, and you wind up discovering not only the Kinks, but now The Who.
This is correct, yeah. Well, that came about because a lady who was working for me part-time was friendly with one of the managers of the Who wanted to know if I would come and listen to them playing live, which happened to be at a church hall. And I said, yeah, sure, because I was on the lookout for stuff. And I went, and it took me about 8 bars to say, yes, I'll sign you. Because they were, what I heard was the best, really, American-style rock and roll band that I'd heard since I had gotten to England.
You mentioned miking those drums. That came in really handy with Keith Moon, who was, just a master.
Keith, I've also said repeatedly, there was Keith Moon as a drummer, as a rock band drummer, and then there was everybody else. And he was brilliant.
Yeah.
And also he's a good guy, and he was fun, and we were good friends, and all that kind of stuff. He was just was fun to have around.
I know you had tremendous success producing both The Who and the Kinks. I mean, with The Who, it's I Can't Explain, Anyway, Anyhow, Anywhere, My Generation, which we just heard, A Legal Matter, The Kids Are All Right. I mean, just incredible records. With the Kinks, you had hits with You Really Got Me, All Day and All the Night, Tired of Waiting for You, Set Me Free, See My Friends, Till the End of the Day, Dedicated Follower of Fashion, A Well-Respected Man, Sunny Afternoon. It just goes on and on. And I think with the Kinks, if I have this correctly, Ray wanted to produce, right?
He did.
Yeah. Right. So at that point...
He did from day number one, actually.
Oh, he did. Okay. And in the case of The Who, boy, that was a terrible situation with their manager, Kit Lambert, trying to edge you out and become a producer himself.
Kit Lambert, as everybody knows, because I've said it in enough times, was one of the major scumbags I've ever met in my entire life. Well, I don't think I want to get into four-letter words here, but he was garbage, and he was jealous of the fact that I was all I've basically done with The Who was make hits. I've never done anything else but hits. And one day I got another letter in the mail saying your contract is null and void, which of course I wouldn't stand for. I sued. Obviously I won. But I was unable to continue recording them, which was bad news because I'd love to have been able to do that.
Yeah. But, despite all of that, I follow you on social media, and I see you chatting back and forth with Dave Davies, and you have so many fond memories of working with the Kinks and The Who, and, I mean, it seems like...
I get along with all those guys, and I have got along with practically everybody in The Who. And I'm still in touch with Pete every now and then, and Pete Quaife and I were very good friends before he died, and we always stayed in touch until he did. And, like that. I mean, I have a great deal of respect for excellent musicians and singers and all that kind of stuff, mainly because I'm a good enough producer not to want to record myself. So I understand the difference. And in any event, no, I like working with bands. I like bands who are really good. So it was not a problem, and stay in touch was not a problem.
As we start to wrap up here, I wanted to mention this group that you worked with who didn't have a lot of success initially in the mid-'60s, but have cast a very long shadow, and now in rock and roll aficionado circles, they are held in high regard, and that's The Creation.
Well, that's one of my major regrets. I had just made a deal for them with Atlantic Records with Ahmet Ertegun, and they broke up. I could not keep them together. I mean, they hated each other for whatever reason. I never understood why. They were all talented. They were writing great songs. If they had agreed to stay together and go on Atlantic, they would have been the superstars they should have been.
At some point, you walked away from producing. Why is that?
Because I got bored. We're talking in the 70s. I started a book publishing company. I did a whole bunch of other stuff, and I was basically bored doing the same damn thing. So I think that's why. There's no particular reason apart from that. Eventually, that passed, and I wanted to get into it again, and I started doing stuff. There was something I was going to say vis-a-vis that. What was that? I don't know. It'll occur to me again.
Where can people go to catch up with you and your opinions and observations on things on social media?
Well, they can go to my Facebook page because what I've been doing for more than the last year is I've been posting vignettes of the bands that I've produced and going into how they came about and who was on it, and I'm also giving some rock history, in a little bit because my core audience is still mature adults, as opposed to Instagram people. But I'm working on that.
Right. So we'll have the Shel Talmy TikTok videos at some point.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Yes. Right.
Well, thank you so much for appearing on the show. And I just want to, I'll say it, just for the record, Jimmy Page did not play the solo on You Really Got Me. Anyway, folks, thanks so much.
Thank you for saying that. I've only said it about 5,000 times.
What is this? This is like Paul is dead. You know, it's
Right.
so utterly stupid.
That's true. Yes, and it's same time frame, yes.
Yeah, the same time frame, and it's the same kind of kooky mentality, and there's no proof or evidence whatsoever. And, well, what are you going to do? Anyway, it's been great speaking with you, and I'd like to go out with a different kind of record, one that you produced in 1964, a gentle record as opposed to some of the heavy rockers we've been playing, a summer song by Chad and Jeremy.
Yeah, well, I was asked to do that by the guy who was head of publishing for United Artists then, and was, in fact, the guy who set up my initial meeting with Dick Rose. So I said, sure, by all means, of course I'll do that. And they were terrific. I enjoyed them, and I liked their songs, and that was fun to do. And I did an album with them, as a matter of fact, and. No regrets about that. I stayed friendly with those guys forever.
Shel Talmy, thanks so much for being on the show, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Pleasure speaking to you, and thanks very much for this.